It was unbelievable. I mean, we almost couldn't produce enough to keep the appetite of our investors happy. More people wanted bonds than we could actually produce. That was our difficult task, was trying to produce enough. They would call and say, you know, we're looking for more fixed rate. What have you got? Do you have anything coming? What's going on? You know, tell us what you're trying to do. From our standpoint, it's like, there's a guy out there with a lot of money. We got to find a way to become his sole provider of bonds, of mortgage bonds, to fill his appetite. And his appetite's massive.
Okay, so Mike, here's Mike's dilemma. He's out there, he has this gigantic pool of money, this gigantic pool of investors out there wanting his thing, wanting his bond. And he's getting paid handsomely for providing it to them. But the only problem is, to make a mortgage-backed security, you need a mortgage. And at a certain point in the mid-2000s, probably 2003, all the safe borrowers who used to qualify for mortgages, they had one, you know? And so Wall Street started accepting loans made to less and less safe borrowers to fill this demand for these mortgage-backed securities. They started accepting loans from people who didn't have to prove that they had a job, for example. Like this one other guy that we met, this guy named Clarence, who had 3 not very steady part-time jobs, made about $45,000 a year, and got a very big loan.
Call it.
Whoa, sorry.
Call it 540 for round figures.
You basically borrowed $540,000 from the bank, and they didn't check your income.
Right. It's a no-income verification loan. They don't call me up and say, you know, how much money. They don't do that. I mean, it's almost like you pass a guy in the street and you say, you lend me $540,000? He said, well, what do you do? I got a job. Okay. I mean, it seems as if it's that casual, even though there are a lot of papers that get filled out and stuff flies all over with the faxes and the emails and all like that. Essentially, that's the process.
Would you have loaned you the money?
I wouldn't have loaned me the money, and nobody that I know would have loaned me the money. I mean, I know guys who are criminals that wouldn't lend me that money, and they'd break your kneecap. So, you know, yeah, I mean, I don't know why the bank did it. I'm serious. I mean, $540,000, a person with bad credit.
Okay, so it gets worse. Because it wasn't just mortgage-backed securities, student loans, credit cards, corporate loans. Wall Street was putting all of them through that champagne contraption that you saw. And they were putting through something called CDOs. CDOs, those were really the weapon of mass destruction that blew up our global economy.
All right, so the CDO, this is where it gets, I need you to expand your mind, because it gets really abstract. Remember, a mortgage-backed security, that's a whole bunch of mortgages grouped together and poured through that champagne contraption. A CDO, they did the same thing, but they didn't take individual mortgages. They took other slices, they took other levels of mortgage-backed securities. So they took that individual AA or that individual BBB bond, they put all those together, and then they poured it through the machine again. So remember these things? That is, instead of a house, a whole bunch of houses going into the champagne bottle, it's a whole bunch of those slices from all sorts of different mortgage-backed securities. So basically what Wall Street was doing was taking this whole thing one level of abstraction further with disastrous consequences. Okay, so let's...
You all with us?
All right.
Everybody's with us.
All right.
Half of you, maybe 1/3. Okay, so we're going to go back to our regular mortgage-backed security. And this is the way that it looks when all the mortgages are paying. Every level gets filled up. Everything's working great. But what happens when a bunch of mortgage holders stop paying? Now, this is the way that the mortgage-backed security looks. This top level is still filled, but the bottom levels are not. And this is where the CDO stops working.
Because the CDO, remember, is made up of those bottom levels. It's made up of it's not made up of the top AAA, it's made up of the single A's, the triple B's, because those are the ones that are getting more yield. So, and remember, that triple B level, it's now all empty. There's nothing to go into the champagne bottle, and that means that the entire CDO gets wiped out.
Right.
It's filled with something that is empty.
That totally empty. That pension fund manager who bought the AAAs, who was a little bit jittery, but bought the AAAs of the CDO, thinking AAA means safe as a government bond. He spent $80 million on this bond. It's all gone. And ditto for all the rest of the levels. The whole thing evaporates.
All right. Now, I imagine there are lots of questions going through your heads right now, like, for example, how in the world was this allowed to happen? Well, we do have regulators. We have government employees whose job it is to make sure this kind of thing does not happen. And where were they, and how did they miss this? Well, we've done a lot of reporting on those regulators. The regulators, it turns out, have a structure that is just as complicated as our champagne contraption out here. There are literally hundreds of regulators watching different parts of the system. There are federal regulators, state regulators, insurance regulators. There are multiple regulators watching individual companies, which Hannah can tell you a lot about.
Right, so like AIG, I spent some time looking into AIG. It's a big insurance company based in New York, and the first place I went, this guy, Eric Dinalo, he is the insurance regulator for the state of New York. So I go to him and I say, okay, AIG, huge insurance company based in your state, so you're kind of screwed up, right? You're responsible. And he said, no. We weren't in charge of AIG. We were in charge of a portion of AIG. What percentage of AIG would you say that you were responsible for looking after?
I'd have to check. I don't know the exact percentage of the property and life divisions put together internationally, so I don't want to speculate.
Can we find out?
Yeah, we can do that.
Thanks. This took 18 minutes, 4 men in suits, 1 computer, 2 cell phones, and I'm not sure how many calculators to figure out what portion of AIG this one office is in charge of. Here's just a little piece of all that.
Is that okay? Yeah? Did the numbers add up about the same? What did you get? What? And then he started banging, and then the reporter's going to say, and then he started banging his head on the wall.
He did bang his head on the wall. And then?
I think on an assets basis, it would be somewhere between 7 and 10%.
Does that mean that Connecticut has 5% and Missouri has 3% and
I'm sure.
Alabama has 4%?
Yeah, I'm sure if you went through and did an analysis, it would definitely be segmented similarly, actually globally.
And that means that all of those states have their own individual regulators. All those countries have their own individual regulators. Maybe the regions have regulators.
Yes, that's our system.